Hey, it's Randip Janda with Hockey Night in Canada, Punjabi, and I have a very exciting announcement to make. Every week, I'll be bringing an interview with somebody from the hockey world right here on Hockey Night in Canada, Punjabi's YouTube channel. So it could be a former player, current player, somebody from the hockey community. Heck, it could be a celebrity that loves hockey as well. Anybody that is interesting, we'll bring them on here on Hockey Night in Canada, Punjabi's YouTube channel. So keep an eye out for that. And week one, we start off with our friend, David Amber of Sportsnet HNIC in Canada. You can catch him on Monday Night Hockey as well. Here's our conversation with David Amber.
Randip, doing well. Here we go. Finally, let's get going, baby.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you first. How excited are you? How ready are you for the kickoff to the very first games of the NHL this year?
I hope I'm ready. I guess I'll let the viewers, I'll let social media tell me how unready I am.
You're a seasoned pro at this point. Come on now.
Well, you know what? We had four preseason games that I was at to host. So over the last couple of weeks, and it's hard to get amped up for preseason hockey. So I'm ready for the real thing. There's so many good storylines. We're all very eager. Opening night to see Connor Bedard in his debut versus Sidney Crosby, and of course on Wednesday we have all 7 Canadian teams on Scotiabank Wednesday Night Hockey. Then we get Bedard into Montreal and Toronto. I mean, it's a great first week of the season, and of course it all culminates at the end of October, the outdoor game, Edmonton and Calgary. So we're kind of hitting the ground running, and I'm pretty pumped. I'm ready for it.
Absolutely, and we're ready to go in Hockey in Canada, Punjabi as well. We got Saturday, and it's such a long off season. It doesn't feel, when you go to school, it feels like, time in the summer is just zipping by. But once you start working hockey, it just feels like, after the cup final to the beginning of preseason games, it just kind of, it takes a while. But wanted to get your thoughts. You mentioned the Edmonton Oilers there a couple of seconds ago, the Heritage Classic. Let's start there. Zip around the Canadian NHL teams. It feels like they're the favorite this year. It feels like they're the buzz team. Is it cup or bust in Edmonton this year, from your opinion?
If you listen to the players, it is.
It's cup or bust, right? Like, I think for this group, just with where everyone's at in their career, that's the expectation, and
they're not there for consolation prizes. They're not there to make a couple rounds. They're there to win a Stanley Cup. And whether it's their top players in McDavid or Draisaitl or even some of the complementary group, it seems like everyone is coming in with the focus of this needs to be the year, right? Like you have the prime of two, you have the generational player in McDavid, you have Leon Draisaitl, who, in any other situation would be the MVP of his team and possibly the MVP of the league, right? So you're riding these guys in their prime right now, and I think they feel like they understand the window, it can evaporate really quickly. So I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, listen, if they make it all the way to the Stanley Cup final and lose in Game 7, are people going to be like, oh, they had a horrible season? Probably not. But I think the ultimate idea for this team is they feel they have the foundation in place. And now that they're going to have Ekholm for the full year, I understand he's injured, obviously, to start the season, but, he's not jumping on, at the trade deadline. They feel they've got the pieces in place. So come and get it.
Yeah, there's a supporting cast. They're a pretty good one, right? We saw what Zach Hyman could do in the top 6. They had Connor Brown. They've got some depth on the wings. You mentioned the defense. I guess if there is a question in Edmonton right now, it's about goaltending. Stuart Skinner, he was an all-star last year, but, we saw some ups and downs in the playoffs. And, what does Jack Campbell bring this year, right? If there's any question about how strong they can be potentially. Out where you are at in Toronto, there's always noise. Come on now, that's always the name of the game. But
yeah,
a little bit more quiet this year. They added some grit. They brought Tyler Bertuzzi and Max Domi, Ryan Reeves. But would you say it was a little bit, with the change with Kyle Dubas going to Pittsburgh, Brad Treliving coming in, the expectation is probably still pretty high, but a little bit quieter than the last few years?
I think it's a little quieter. There's always chatter. Same in Vancouver, same in Montreal. There's always something to talk about, but it's a little quieter. And I think it's because the narrative has changed slightly. For 19 years, and certainly for the last 6 years, it was like, can the Leafs just win a playoff round? Like, can this group, you have these great young players, can they actually win a playoff round? So that narrative's been answered. Yes, they can win a playoff round. Now the real question is, they took that process. Can they move forward? Can they show some level of, just like the Oilers? I wouldn't say it's Stanley Cup or bust. in Toronto, but certainly I think there's a recognition that you have Marner and Matthews and Nylander and some of your other core players in their prime, and this is your window. You have Boston now with Bergeron and Krejci out. Maybe there's just an opportunity there. You have Vasilevsky out at least for the first couple months. Maybe there's an opportunity there to have a little bit of a change of the guard in the Atlantic Division. Can you take advantage of that? Can you be the team that has sort of not lived up to those expectations with these great young players? Is this the year you can break through? So the chatter's a little bit less, but the expectations are pretty high in Toronto.
I bet, yeah. Game one probably on the board. That's when the conversation will really ramp up as well. All it takes is some real hockey to be played for that conversation to start. But different conversation in Ottawa this year. New ownership group. You've got your young players locked in. They tried to add in different ways. And Stützle, we saw what he could do last year. Brady Tkachuk has turned into one of the best young captains, if not the best young captain in the league. They have a goalie now, Jonas Korpisalo. How much pressure is on those young guys and Pierre Dorion specifically? Because there's been a fair bit of noise since the ownership change about, is he the guy? Will he be the guy?
Randip, you said, is it Stanley Cup or bust for Edmonton? It's playoffs or bust in Ottawa. I mean, you can't have the team they have. And these guys have been paid, whether it's Norris, whether it's Sanderson, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's Tkachuk, whether it's Stützle. We can keep going. They're all getting paid. They haven't won a playoff. They haven't made the playoffs yet as a collective group. So the expectation has to be, this year, you guys have been paid. You've shown brilliance, outside of October and November. And that's the key, I think, in Ottawa. Look at the last 3 years, their starts, right? A couple of years ago, 4 wins in the first 15 games. Last year, you're climbing out of these massive holes where you're winning 2 out of your first 10 or 12 games. You can't play, you can't really aspire to have a playoff team when you bury yourself that deep. I know what we saw from St. Louis in 2019, but that was an anomaly, right? A team going from worst to first. Ottawa has to come out of the gate strong. There's already a few concerns up the middle. Obviously, Norris's shoulder injury is not fully healed. That's a massive concern going into the season. Shane Pinto needs a contract. That's a massive concern going into the season. So there are some question marks, but clearly the expectations are this is a playoff caliber team. And again, I mentioned some of these other teams in the Atlantic, maybe are sliding a little bit. And at the same time, you have, Detroit's in the same boat as Ottawa. Buffalo's in the same boat as Ottawa. These teams that are saying we're ready to break through. So I can't wait to see. I think that's maybe one of the most intriguing storylines. Which of those 3 teams in the Atlantic that's trying to move up into playoff contention, Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo, is ready to actually make that push? Is it more than one team? I think it's really interesting because it could be a very topsy-turvy year in the Atlantic Division.
Yeah, for the first time in years, it looks like there could actually be movement when it comes to the big 3 there. You mentioned the start. That's kind of like the name of chapter 1 of the Canucks season, like the start, because they've had terrible starts here in Vancouver for a number of years. Now, if you look back at what they did in the offseason and what the team looks like right now, how do you view the Canucks? Because there is a bit of an existential crisis here in Vancouver of what this team is, but from a distance and from just covering this team every Saturday night and every week, how do you look at the changes that they've made?
Well, I think they've been really smart as a management group, Alvin, Rutherford, everyone addressing the problems that existed. I mean, again, you're 100% right, because if you look at the starts the last couple of years, once Boudreau came in, once Tocchet came in, they were playoff caliber teams. It's what happened in the first 25 to 35 games of the season that absolutely buried them, right? But they looked at their PK, which was historically bad. I mean, it was embarrassingly bad, and they've gone out and they've addressed that a little bit. Health will obviously be another key issue. And if Thatcher Demko, a lot of people are picking him to be the Vezina winner. We've seen him at his best. He's a special talent, and we've seen him injured, and they counted on him so heavily, it was a disaster. I think they made a real statement when they bought out the contract of OEL. We're ready to change guard. We're ready to eat our mistakes. We're ready to move in a different direction. And they've picked up players that can kill penalties. They've picked up players that are harder to play against. I think essentially they're trying to take on the identity of their head coach, Rick Tocchet. We all remember what Rick Tocchet was like as a player: hard-nosed, grinded out, battled for every inch of ice, battled for every puck. And he expects that from his players. And he said as much, right? When he looks at some of the young players on this team, I think he wants them to take on a bit of that identity. The skilled players will still be the skilled players, but he expects an effort level and within the structure of what he's trying to do defensively to not give up these high caliber chances night in, night out. So I like what Vancouver's done. I think the thing that might be working against the Canucks is 2-3 years ago, the Pacific Division, Randip, I thought was an easier division. It certainly didn't have any really high-end teams 2-3 years ago, it felt. Now you look at the top end of it with Vegas, with Edmonton, who obviously we've just talked about. Seattle, you can't sleep on Seattle, clearly, and Los Angeles. You have 4 very good teams, and I want to put Calgary in that group too, right? Everything that could go wrong went wrong for Calgary, and they missed the playoffs by 1 or 2 points last year. 31 goal losses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Markstrom was really horrible last year. He's going to be much improved. The team's going to be much improved. To me, you could argue the Pacific Division might be the toughest in hockey. So that might be the one thing that really is going to work a little bit against Vancouver and all the changes they've made.
Yeah, there's potential for all 5 playoff teams. Well, the 3 coming out of the Central for sure, but the 2 wildcard teams could be coming from the Pacific based on the strength of that division. And
100%.
You mentioned the Flames. I want to put the Flames and the Jets kind of together here because the vibes were off last year. We could tell that with Daryl Sutter as well. It didn't work out there. Something in the room in Winnipeg wasn't working either, and Rick Bowness was not shy about letting everybody know about that in media. Who's more likely to get those vibes back this year?
If I had to pick one, I'm going to pick Calgary, and simply because when you look at the level of underperformance from Jonathan Huberdeau, from Jacob Markstrom, from a lot of their key players, there's just the hill was so dramatic between what we expected them to perform at and where they performed. Whereas the performance, Winnipeg had its issues. Ehlers was hurt for a fair bit of time. You mentioned the chemistry issues and the fact that they moved out Pierre-Luc Dubois. They bought out Blake Wheeler. Says they definitely wanted to change the tone in the dressing room, the feel of the room, and maybe they've accomplished that. But I do feel the Calgary side, just to me, was it honestly blew my mind how bad they were last year. They obviously have a different head coach, a different vibe. You hear the players are happy to be going to the rink now and all that chatter. And I think because of the level of underperformance there, I just think, the hill for Calgary to ascend back up to should be easier for them. They don't need Huberdeau to have 115 points. I don't think that's going to happen again, but they can't have the 55-point version they had last year. And he's too good to be that, ineffective on the ice. So I think if everything kind of comes back to its median with Huberdeau, with Kadri, with that blue line, who I think is one of the most formidable blue lines, and most importantly with their goalie Markstrom, I can't remember, it was an 8.83 or an 8.88, whatever his save percentage was. He doesn't have to be 920, but if he can be 905, 907, like he should be, and like we expect him to be, it'll be a very different narrative for the Calgary Flames this year.
Yeah, and one of the better stories this preseason has been the rise of Matt Coronado. He's playing in the top 6. Looks like he's going to make the team. And then They probably have the best goaltender in the world outside the NHL and Dustin Wolf in the AHL on top of that. So the future and the near future looks pretty good if they can bounce back with those vibes. All right, let's bounce around the league a little bit real quickly as well.
Sure.
The Pittsburgh Penguins. How far will Erik Karlsson take them? They already got Sid, they got Gino, they got those guys, but the reigning Norris winner goes to a new team. What kind of impact is he going to have?
Yeah, I'm really intrigued. It's not just Karlsson. They've gutted the team. Dubas walked in there. There's 10 new players. Guys are introducing themselves. So, hey, what's your name? Yeah, we're teammates now. It's going to be a very different feel. I want to see how quickly that chemistry blends in. The other thing I'm going to be keeping an eye on, we're doing the game again, the opening night, Bedard versus Crosby. It's going to be fantastic. I want to see the ice time. Erik Karlsson had 25 plus minutes per game last year. I think he was 3rd or 4th in the league. Letang had close to 25 minutes a game last year. He was in the top 10 in ice time. How much ice is there to go around? And I know Dubas has said, well, each of those guys might play 25 minutes. I just want to see how this is going to work. And on the power play, how is this going to work? You have to keep everyone happy, engaged, and feeling comfortable with their spot on the team. So you have this incumbent player, Letang, with the Stanley Cups and all the pedigree, and he's such a workhorse. He's been through so much with the strokes and everything else, and loved by his teammates. And you have Karlsson, who obviously a 3-time Norris winner, comes in. How are they going to manage all of that? So I'm really interested to see, how it plays out. Pittsburgh's one of those teams. Like, honestly, you can flip a coin. I would never bet against any team that Sidney Crosby's on to not make the playoffs. But then you also look at that division and you say, the Rangers are a very good team. The Devils are certainly in a team on ascending. Carolina, a lot of people are picking them to win the Stanley Cup, or at least to represent the East. So where does Pittsburgh fit in when you look at that other trio of teams atop the Metro division? So it's super intriguing. Karlsson, if we get last year's version of Karlsson, Randip, he could lead them to great things. If we get the 4 previous years of Erik Karlsson injured and all those other issues, then it's gonna kind of blow up in their face. So I'm really interested to see how this works out.
Yeah, one of the more interesting stories for this year, but also in San Jose, he kind of had free reign where he could activate whenever he wanted. He was the offense. In Pittsburgh, you got a few different cooks in the kitchen. So, like, how do you manage that ice time, but also role, right? Like, being that rover, that's what Erik Karlsson is. But is there a limit to how much he can do with Pittsburgh, because there are other guys with the puck on their stick, right?
Yeah. Mike Sullivan, listen, Mike Sullivan's a very savvy coach. He's one of the longest tenured coaches, a 2-time Stanley Cup winner. But this is going to be something very interesting to keep Letang happy, to keep Karlsson happy. There's only one puck. There's only one first power play unit. Are you going to run 2 defensemen out there? No team seems to do that anymore on the power play. Is Pittsburgh going to be one of those teams that does that? I'm very interested to see how it plays out.
All right, this next question is specifically for you, because you were the earliest person the person earliest to suggest that Alexander Ovechkin could even break Wayne Gretzky's record. So as we get closer to this, and we'll see if it happens, he's still got some ways to go. What is the more intriguing story to you? Ovi watch or Connor Bedard watch? There's a lot of great storylines this year, but like, I feel like one of these stories is going to take over the NHL this year.
I'm going to say Connor Bedard watch for a number of reasons. I mean, I think for the main reason, if Alexander Ovechkin was 35 goals behind Gretzky or 45 goals behind Gretzky, then there's some intrigue. No one's, I think, anticipating him to score 70 goals this year, which is, what is he, 72 behind or something along those lines, right? Yeah, I mean, as it gets closer and closer and closer, I think that storyline is going to be the overwhelming big storyline, maybe not just in hockey, but in sports, right? Because this is one of those records you just never, ever would anticipate could be broken, because, Wayne Gretzky's just been in a world of his own. But this year, and maybe I'm too close to this because I was at the draft, you were at the draft. I mean, there was great intrigue for Connor Bedard. Can he be that next great generational player? And we call them generational players, but now they're kind of coming out of the woodworks a little bit more often, right? But can he be the next great Connor in the NHL? Can he live up to this hype? And I think it's really intriguing. The Chicago Blackhawks sold more than $5 million in season tickets after they won the draft lottery. That's all based on Connor Bedard. The number one selling sweater in the NHL right now, when you look at the merchandise, is Connor Bedard. He hasn't played a game yet he's the hottest item. So it's not just the Chicago market. NHL fans are taking note. I think everyone's going to be watching him every game. The other teams are focused on him right now. It's great. It's energized the fan base. It's energized hockey to think that we could have another superstar in our midst. It's wonderful. It's a lot of pressure on this young man who just turned 18 in July. But in sitting with him and talking with him, I got a chance to meet him during the NHL Awards. We sat and talked for about 15 minutes. So mature. He seems much older than his age. He seems uber focused. And it's so funny. We're so focused on that great shot of his. And granted is, he shoots the puck like a top 10 NHLer at this point, talking to other people in the league. But to me, it's his hockey IQ. He's got a bit of that Gretzky-esque. I'm not going to where the puck was. I'm going to where the puck's going to be. I can see the ice. He's not known as a pure playmaker as much as a scorer, but I think he can just do so many different things. It's really exciting. And there's, it's starting out against Crosby, Randip, got 102 points in his rookie season. And then we look at some other players, Jack Hughes had a tough first year. Connor McDavid was a point a game guy until he broke his collarbone in his first year, but I think we're going to lean towards more of the Sidney Crosby first year, Austin Matthews, 40 goal scorer in his first year. I think that's what we're going to expect and possibly see from Connor Bedard. So I'm just super excited to see what he can do. And it's a really cool storyline. The OV storyline will pick up speed.
It will.
I think it might just take another 6-7 months before we're like, oh, wow, he's within 30-40 goals of the great one.
Yeah, two things I'm looking for in the Connor Bedard thing is how do goalies react to his release, which is unreal. We've seen it already. The other thing is in the WHL, he was selling out rinks wherever he went. Like even, franchises that didn't maybe get the most attendance, Connor Bedard was making it happen. That's going to happen in the NHL as well. There's going to be a lot of areas where are going to be immediate sellouts if they aren't already with him coming to town. So we'll see that kind of that traveling roadshow, so to speak. All right, we were recently at an event in Toronto together for our friends at Jack Victor and the social media team of Sportsnet. I should have expected this, but they asked me for my cup prediction or cup winner prediction. I'm not gonna lie, I had to freeze for about 5 seconds. I hadn't really thought about it, even though the season's approaching. I know you do this for .ca as well, sportsnet.ca. Can you give us a sneak peek on what's in that article? Who is your Stanley Cup prediction? Who's coming from the West? Who's coming from the East?
All right. I want to preface this by saying I'm an idiot and I get this wrong basically every year. I was this close to picking the Dallas Stars to win the cup because I do love the mix of veteran, elite talent, the Joe Pavelskis of the world, and the leadership they have with that group, combined with these great young players, the Jason Robertsons, Rope Hintz, etc. And of course, Jake Ottinger at his best is an elite goalie. But I hesitated, and I felt weird to bet against Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl. I like that. Evan Bouchard, Ekholm, Darnell Nurse. They have a great, young, good, talented nucleus on the blue line. And I do think they have enough goaltending. One thing we've learned over the last 2 Stanley Cup winners, Darcy Kemper in Colorado, Aiden Hill, essentially, last year with Laurent Brossoit starting the playoffs. You don't need Patrick Waugh to win a Stanley Cup. You need good goaltending. And I think they can get enough good goaltending between Stuart Skinner and Jack Campbell, who I think is going to be much better than he was last year. Last year was just a tough season for Jack Campbell, but we've seen him here in Toronto. He can be a very elite goalie. So I'm picking Edmonton to win the cup, to come out of the West, although Dallas is definitely on my mind. And in the East, it was a bit of a crapshoot. And I'm sure people in Vancouver will be rolling their eyes, and maybe people in Toronto. But I do think this could be the year the Leafs can get through, have that breakthrough. Carolina is obviously an interesting team. To me, the Rangers, I picked them to win the cup last year. Obviously, that didn't happen. I still love the nucleus of the Rangers, but I was a bit hesitant to. I didn't think they did enough in the offseason necessarily to pump them up. Whereas I think the Leafs addressed some of, as Brad Trey Living said so eloquently, we added some snot to our team. So I think they've added some guys on 1-year contracts, which I like because he keeps, the motivations there and everything else, to come in there and stir things up. And Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, Ryan Reeves, I don't think you're winning the cup because of Ryan Reeves, but does he help you? Does he become another tangible part towards a cup type caliber team? Potentially. So I think they've added some players there. And I think that could be a team that's ready, with some of the deficits maybe in Tampa and in Boston to be the class of the Atlantic. So I'm going, and maybe this is my Sportsnet hat, right? Like we root for all the Canadian teams because it's good for us, right, Randip? So
that's all right. That's all right.
If we got an Edmonton-Toronto final, would not be a problem for us ratings-wise. So maybe it's my heart of hearts speaking, but I have Edmonton-Toronto as my 2 conference finalists and cup winners.
You address grit with the Toronto Maple Leafs. You get, you mentioned that Edmonton might have enough goaltending. The most important thing that we've seen in the last couple of years is defense, and you have those impact players to make a difference at the top of your lineup. Edmonton has, with Ekholm, I think, one of the more underrated players in the last probably 5 to 6 years in the NHL on their back end, as long as he stays healthy. Not the greatest of starts, but there you go. David Amber's Stanley Cup predictions.
Well, I want to, and let me preface something because people are probably going, the Leafs blue line doesn't seem like a Stanley Cup caliber blue line. And I think that's a fair statement, especially after what we saw, in Tampa, in Colorado, last year in Vegas. I mean, we're talking such solid 1-6 blue line. I think that's where there could be some additions, like that's one thing. Brad Trey Living is not afraid to pull off a trade. And if he needs to augment that blue line during the season towards the trade deadline, I could see that being the situation. So I make no bones about saying I think the Leafs could be that team in the East because they're sort of in that position offensively wise, and they might add a piece on defense as well.
Well, we're looking forward to it. We're a couple of nights away here, and David, you're going to have the entire season covered. Hockey Night in Canada during the week on Sportsnet. I'm sure you're going to be doing special projects as well. So you can catch David Amber, Hockey Night in Canada, Sportsnet, and I'm sure social media. They'll probably get you to do everything because you can handle it.
Yeah, Rogers Monday Night Hockey, Randy.
There you go.
We got in our first game is the Leafs versus Bedard, his first and only trip to Toronto this year. So yeah, we kick off. It's such a good scheduling wise. The first month of the season is fantastic. It's going to be a great start.
All right, you know where to find him. Thank you very much, David. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be keeping an eye as well from Hockey Night in Canada, Punjabi. Even though we're on the air at the same time, we always watch you guys too. Take care.
Awesome, Randy. We love it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Hope you enjoyed our conversation with David Amber, and make sure to comment, like, subscribe to our channel. And what do you think of David's Stanley Cup prediction? Do you like it? Do you have a different opinion? Hit us up in the comments and make sure to subscribe.